Imagine one warm slice of apple pie. Golden crust, soft apples, cinnamon rising with the steam. It appears at family tables, roadside diners, and American celebrations. Yet almost nothing inside it truly began in America. Not the pie, not the apples, not even the spice. So how did this foreign dessert become a national symbol? The answer lies in a transformation that took centuries, and it may change what American really means. Long before apple pie became a symbol of comfort, pie was not even a dessert. Ancient cooks wrapped meat, fish, and vegetables inside thick shells of dough. The crust was often hard, bland, and sometimes barely meant to be eaten. It worked like a container, holding food together, protecting it, and helping it last longer. Then something slowly changed. Honey, dried fruit, and spices began entering the crust. A practical food became sweeter. A rough shell became part of the meal itself. But one essential ingredient was still missing. The fruit that would one day define America's most famous pie had not yet begun its journey across the ocean. The apples Americans know did not begin in America. European settlers carried seeds and young trees across the Atlantic beside tools, clothing, and family recipes. Planting them was a way to rebuild the taste of home on unfamiliar soil. Soon, orchards spread beside cabins and settlements. But when did this immigrant fruit begin tasting like America? Apple pie did not cross the Atlantic as one perfect recipe. Settlers rebuilt it with whatever the new land provided. Butter was scarce, sugar expensive, ovens crude, and the apples tasted different. So families adapted. Dried fruit replaced fresh, animal fat replaced butter, and every kitchen created its own pie. But inside one cold colonial home, necessity would turn these borrowed ingredients into something distinctly American. Picture a colonial kitchen just before winter. A woman gathers bruised apples, coarse flour, a little animal fat, and one precious pinch of spice. Nothing can be wasted. She seals the fruit beneath dough and pushes the pie toward the fire. Soon, its warm scent fills the cold wooden room, turning scarcity into comfort. She has not invented apple pie, but in kitchens like hers, an imported recipe is becoming something new. In 1796, that transformation would finally be written down. In 1796, apple pie entered America's written history. Amelia Simmons published American Cookery, the first known cookbook written by an American and printed in the United States. Among its recipes were early American versions of apple pie. That moment mattered. The young nation was still searching for its own identity, and here was an old European dish being rewritten with American ingredients, measurements, and habits. Apple pie was no longer only a memory carried across the ocean. It now belonged on the pages of a new country. But recipes alone could not make it a national symbol. For that, the pie would have to travel west, with families willing to risk everything for a new home. As families pushed west, apple seeds and young trees traveled beside tools, blankets, and family recipes. Planting an orchard meant more than growing food. It meant believing you would survive long enough to see it bear fruit. Soon, apple trees marked new farms across the frontier, and pies appeared wherever homes took root. But orchards alone could not make apple pie beloved. For that, it had to enter the family home. Apple pie became part of American family life, not through presidents or monuments, but through ordinary kitchens. Mothers taught daughters how thin to roll the crust. Grandmothers measured cinnamon by memory. Children waited beside the oven, learning that a smell could mean safety, celebration, or someone returning home. Every family changed the recipe, yet each claimed theirs was the right one. Slowly, the pie became more than food. It became memory passed from hand to hand. But the sweetest symbol on the table carried a darker history beneath its crust. Beneath that sweetness, however, lay a harder truth. Sugar was once expensive, and its rise was tied to plantations, forced labor, and the Atlantic trade. Butter, fine flour, spices, and fresh apples were not available to everyone. Wealthy families served rich pies with tender crusts. Poorer homes stretched dried fruit, coarse flour, and whatever fat they could spare. And behind every polished table stood invisible workers, people who planted, harvested, carried, mixed, and baked, yet were rarely remembered. Apple pie could symbolize home, but it also revealed who enjoyed the sweetness, who produced it, and who was never invited to the table. By the early 20th century, pie had become so deeply American that reformers declared war on it. Doctors and nutritionists called it heavy, unhealthy, even dangerous. But many families heard something else, an attack on mothers, kitchens, and home itself. Newspapers argued. Cookbooks defended it. A simple dessert had become a cultural battlefield. Then war would give apple pie an even greater power. But how did a slice of pastry come to represent everything soldiers believed they were fighting for? During wartime, apple pie became more than dessert. It became home. The phrase, "Mom and apple pie," came to represent what many soldiers missed and believed they were defending: the mother waiting at the door and the warm kitchen behind her. One slice could represent childhood, safety, and the ordinary life they hoped to return to. But after the war, this private memory would become a national slogan and create one of America's most famous food myths. After the war, the phrase, "as American as apple pie," spread everywhere. It sounded natural, almost ancient. But it hid a strange truth. The apples came from abroad, the pie came from Europe, and the spices crossed oceans. So why did Americans choose this borrowed dessert to represent themselves? Somehow, this borrowed dessert had already become tied to farms, family rituals, war, and memory. Yet, one final transformation remained. In the next era, factories, diners, and fast food chains would take a handmade symbol of home and sell it to millions. In the 20th century, apple pie left the family kitchen. Factories froze it, supermarkets stacked it, diners served it by the slice, and fast food chains turned it into something you could hold in one hand. A dessert that once took hours could now be bought in minutes. Yet something unexpected happened. Mass production did not erase its meaning. Under the neon lights of a roadside diner, a truck driver eating alone could order coffee and a warm slice, and taste something that felt like home. Soon, that feeling would enter America's biggest celebrations. Apple pie soon appeared at 4th of July picnics, Thanksgiving tables, county fairs, and small-town baking contests. Families argued over the best apples, the flakiest crust, even whether cheese belonged on top. But these differences revealed something important. There was never just one American apple pie. The answer was hidden in those differences. Across America, apple pie changed with the people who made it. New England families might serve it with cheddar. Elsewhere, vanilla ice cream melted over the warm crust. Some guarded old recipes, while others changed them after every move and migration. There was no single correct apple pie, only thousands of versions that everyone could recognize and still make their own. Apple pie became a quiet language of care. It arrived when a family moved next door, when someone returned home, when a child was born, or when grief left people without words. Making one required time: peeling apples, rolling dough, and waiting for the crust to turn gold. That time became part of the gift. A pie could say what its baker could not. I thought of you before I came, and every pie carried fingerprints history had forgotten to name. Behind every apple pie were hands history rarely named, hands that planted trees, gathered fruit, and shaped dough at crowded tables. A grandmother's crimped crust, a child's uneven slices, an immigrant's substituted spice. Each small choice survived longer than its maker. The recipe traveled through gestures, not monuments. Those changing gestures carried the final clue. The recipe survived not by staying pure, but by changing hands. So, what was the true recipe behind apple pie's success? The pie came from Europe. The apples crossed the Atlantic. The spices traveled even farther. Yet in America, immigrants adapted it, farmers reshaped it, and families made room for their own memories inside it. That is why apple pie became American. Not because America invented it, but because America transformed it. Its finest ingredient was adaptation. The power to make many histories taste like home. Now imagine that warm slice before you, the crust breaking softly, cinnamon rising, apple filling spilling onto the plate. Perhaps you too are made from many places, a family recipe, a language half remembered, a city left behind, traditions changed so they could survive. Apple pie reminds us that home is not always where something begins. Sometimes home is where different stories finally belong together. And so, we return to the autumn kitchen. In just one slice are ships, orchards, immigrants, unnamed hands, soldiers, diners, and generations gathered around a table. Journeys that began far apart have finally met there. Next time you taste it, remember, you are not only eating dessert, you are tasting a journey that found a home.